I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Carl Schmitt. Reading Carl Schmitt. Uh, and we're reading what of Carl Schmitt? The Concept of Political. Today we're looking at section 6 of it, the sixth section, which I think is going to be about the foreign influence, because he said we talked about it. He mentioned that we're going to be dealing with this question of this. Um, uh, you know, so we're going to be looking at chapter 6. That's section 6. So the political entity presupposes the real existence of an enemy, and therefore the coexistence of another political entity. So therefore, in other words, the political entity. In other words, a political entity presupposes that there's another political entity, and it's a threat to it. It can be that, right? As long as the state exists, there will always be in the world more than just one state. Um, um, a world state would embrace the entire globe, and all of humanity cannot exist. In other words, embrace the entire globe, and all of humanity cannot exist. In other words, you can't really have an existing of a state. This why? And I'm going to go into this question, um, and this is where the state presupposes an enemy. A state is the political entity. And this can only exist if there is something that it opposes in that sense, that threatens it in existence in that sense. So this idea that there be a world state, there'd be all humanity under it, just really, he says that cannot exist. And this is where Schmitt would disagree with Kojève. Because remember, Kojève's idea of the state, in other words, this is where Kojève's idea of the state, which is more understood administratively, a structure of administrative structuring of things, how delivered services, could understand that you take the concept of the state, which deals with administration, and that's actually even Hobbes. This is where Hobbes can be said. You take Hobbes's thing and deprive Hobbes's, and say, listen, just follow the logic of Hobbes. And then once you had an agreement by all the humanity to form the compact, then there is not, in other words, the state in the Hobbesian frame is not designed to, in terms of an enemy per se, or to a contestation, but rather it is done to avoid the contestation that happens in the political, in nature. It wants to try to escape nature in that sense. That the condition in the state of nature is this conflict of one thing to another thing. And therefore, in order to escape that, we create the state. But then could not the state itself then totally destroy that anarchy if once you create networks, states themselves create networks of structures that then that what was done at the individual level now that instead of contestation they contract, and by contracting they form a state, a state, a sovereign, a unitary sovereign, define rules. And this is what Kojève argues, that Kojève sees the logic following Hegel, logic of Hegel, and then seeing through the master-slave dialectic the progression of this. Schmitt says no, that the state is the embodiment of the political, and the political exists because there is a existential threat to it. Once there is no existential threat, no condition of this, then there's no politics, there's no political community. It ceases to be. Okay, and this is what he says: as long as the state exists, there will always be in the world more than just one state. A world state which embraces the entire globe and cannot exist. The political world is a pluralverse, not a universe. Okay? The political world is a pluralverse, not a universe. A universe is one. Here is because there's contestation here, the political world is a pluralverse. There's always going to be heterogeneity, diversity, not homogeneity, oneness. It's going to be diversity of this. In this sense, every theory of state is pluralistic, even though in a different way from the domestic theory of pluralism discussed in section 4. The political entity cannot, by its very nature, be universal in the sense of embracing of all humanity in the entire world. If the different states, religion, classes, and all the other and the other human groups on Earth should be so unified that a conflict among them is impossible and even inconceivable, and if civil war should forever be foreclosed in a realm which embraces the globe, then the distinction of friend and enemy would also cease. In other words, it would ultimately end the reality of human nature as we know it. In other words, it's not possible unless there's a fundamental change of human nature. Now, this is what led Fukuyama in his, what was it? That stop for a second. This is what led Fukuyama in his 2002 Post-Human Future to kind of revise his his reading in the end of his in The Last Man, which was a kind of Kojevian argument that the universal state, that the new global world was going to be that the new system of global governance was going to lead to a universal homogenous state. That he says in that book, oh no, 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 it can never happen, because he kind of steps back from his position, arguing that in order to get that, you'd have to have a fundamental, human nature would have to change. And therefore, I think in that case, this is where Fukuyama there looks at the question of the Kojevian thing, and this Kojevian vision goes too far. The argument that you'd have to change human nature. Now, Schmitt, I think this is where Fukuyama, and remember, Fukuyama then turns to state building, right? This is how Fukuyama's whole, he kind of embraces his inner Huntington and embraces the kind of state theory that is in the Clash of Civilization, which again goes back not to the Clash of Civilizations, but to his classic 1968 work, Political Order and Changing Society, which then becomes the front, that, in other words, that 2004 work by Fukuyama, which deals with the so-called state and the failed states and trying to build states. And then this leads to his classic and was it 2010, 2012? Yeah, his 2011, 2014 two-volume things on political order, right? The origins of political order, and then the change of political order, right? His two magnum opus, which is his idea of state development, right? And that stuff, which is basically his revising of Huntington's uh, 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 political order and changing societies, right? This is the hunt. This is the that Fukuyama becomes Huntington in that sense, in a weird way. But back to Schmitt here. Schmitt is basically saying that if you have this world order, that you have this homogenous thing, then there'd be no political anymore. There's no friends and enemy. Particularly, even if you, in other words, the argument is that even civil war would be inconceivable, right? That, in other words, that this would cease to exist, right? What remains is neither politics nor state, but culture, civilization, economics, morality, law, and entertainment, etc. And if and when this condition will appear, I do not know. At the moment, this is not the case. And if and it is self-deluding to believe that the termination of modern war would lead to world peace. This setting forth the idyllic goal of complete and total depolitization simply because war between great powers today may turn into total war. In other words, depolitization is not this. In fact, his basic thrust is this may be inhuman. This to depolitization, to turn man away from politics, to escape by creating a homogeneous administrative structure that replace politics with culture, these things, culture, civilization, economics, morality, law, art, entertainment. This, now he says that this is not going to, that this is, this, we're going to, just because total war, modern war is going to lead to total war, and this is unthinkable, therefore we want peace. No, just peace may be inhuman in that sense for Schmitt. Humanity as such cannot wage war because it has no enemies, this idea. In other words, at least not on this planet. Okay, that's the idea. The concept of humanity excludes the concept of the enemy, because the enemy does not cease to be a human being, and hence there is no specific differential in that concept, right? So at the level of human being, there is no humanity is not. There's no enemy in this sense, because there's no concept that deals with that they are still human beings. Okay. Now, as a concept of a particular people and a particular thing, yes, there is going to be an enemy, right? But at the concept of a state or a political entity, there's going to be someone who's a threat to it, an enemy, okay? And then that exists in that sense. That wars are waged in the name of humanity is not a contradiction of the simple truth, but quite the contrary. It has an especially intense political meaning. When a state fights its political enemy in the name of humanity, it is not a war for the sake of humanity, but a war where a particular state seeks to usurp a universal concept against its military opponent. In other words, it's going to usurp a universal concept against its military opponent. At the expense of the opponent, it tries to identify itself with humanity in the same way as one can misuse peace, justice, progress, and civilization in order to claim that these as one's own and to deny the same to the enemy. So in other words, it's an usurpation of the claim, saying that we possess the game, you don't, so therefore we're the good guy here. Okay. The concept of humanity is an especially useful ideological instrument of imperialist expansion, and its ethical humanitarian form is a specified vehicle of an economic imperialism. In other words, this is a very interesting claim. He says human rights, this idea that we're going to, this idea of humanity is going to be ultimately an imperialistic claim. It's going to be very powerful imperialistically. It's going to have an ethical humanitarian characteristic, and ethical will justify its reach, its attempt to aggrandize and to take control. Here, one is reminded of a somewhat modified expression of Proudhon's "whomever invokes humanity wants to cheat." Right. This is from the French thinker, that this idea that anyone who evokes humanity wants to cheat. To confiscate the word humanity, to invoke and monopolize such a term probably has certain and incalculable effects, such as denying the enemy the quality of being human and declaring him to be an outlaw of humanity. And a war then therefore be driven to the most extreme inhumanity. Now, this is a very important note here. Outlawing law, as seen as Section 5 of Pufendorf's on the laws of nature and laws on the rights of nature and of peoples, right, nations, quotes approvingly Bacon's comment that the specific peoples are prescribed by nature itself, i.e. Indians, because they eat human flesh. And in fact, the Indians of North America that were exterminated. As civilization progresses and morality rises, even less harmless things than devouring human flesh can perhaps qualify as deserving to be outlawed in this manner. One day it will be enough if a people were unable to pay its debts. Yes, this is Hitler's is making the comment about the German situation, right? That you can't pay its debt, we'll go to war with you. In other words, humanity in this way has this that once you declare war and this humanity is this thing, they'll be driven to the most extreme inhumanity. But besides, and that maybe the Nazis, right? The Nazis declared this unhuman. We can say the communists and the Nazis by the way that this is. I'm going to get into controversy here because Schmitt was a Nazi, wasn't he? No, he wasn't. Not a true ideological Nazi in this sense. The real Nazi understood it in terms of race, this racial understanding of this other people, this Aryan, this thing, and then in order to achieve the perfection of humanity, you had to embrace this mentality, and everything else was seen, and therefore Jews and the inferior people are to be exterminated for the sake of this. Well, the same thing with the Marxists. The Marxist and the good communist sees the idea of the end of history, that this world state, this communist vision of the party, assumes that everything else can be sacrificed towards it, and therefore the extermination of class enemies. So instead of genocide, you have classicide, right? Groups of people who are the enemies of and groups who are seen as the enemy of this evolutionary, inevitable revolution of the worker proletariat and the achievement of the party and the rise of the rule of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then eventually this end state, this end goal. Anyone who blocks the revolution is to be exterminated or eliminated. Right? These ideological constructs become a kind of version of humanity that therefore leads to this inhumanity. Right? This is his point, that these higher goals like human rights and things like this can be very vicious. But besides this highly political utilization of the non political term humanity, there are no wars of humanity as such. Humanity is not a political concept, and no political entity or society or and no status corresponds to it. The 18th century humanitarian concept of humanity was a polemical denial of the then existing aristocratic feudal system and the privileges accompanying it. Humanity, according to natural law and liberal individualist doctrines, is a universal, i.e., all embracing social idea, a system of relations between individuals. This materializes only when a real possibility of war is precluded and every friend and enemy grouping becomes impossible. In this universal society, there would no longer be nations in forms of political entities, no classes, and no enemy groupings. In other words, the social must be destroyed and only the individual. See, this is the problem of the Enlightenment mentality. The Enlightenment mentality dissolves all social bonds. But human beings are not individuals. They're not born of themselves. They're born of families. They're not born voluntaristically. They're born completely involuntaristically, against their will. This is the whole problem about this. So therefore, this idea of this individual humanity assumes the individual who has no bonds. In other words, let's look at this guy. There's no bonds. This universal society would no longer be of nations in the form of political entities, no class struggles, no enemy groups. The League of Nations idea was clear and precise as long as such a body could be constructed as a polemical antithesis to a League of Monarchs, right? It was in the context that the German word Völkerbund, the People's Bond, originated in the 18th century, right? But this polemical meaning disappeared with the political significance of monarchy. A Völkerbund could moreover serve as an ideological instrument of the imperialism of the state or a coalition of states against other states. This would then confirm all that has been said previously concerning the political and the use of the term humanity. For many people, the idea of a global organization means nothing else than a utopian idea of total depoliticization. Demands are therefore made almost immediately, or no, almost always indiscriminately, that all states on earth become members as soon as possible, and it should be universal. Universality at any price would necessarily mean to have total depoliticization, and with it, particularly the non-existence of states. So this is this is a very interesting argument here, right? That this idea of this universal system would destroy states. But once you destroy states, you destroy the political. And there's no, this idea, the depoliticization, the concept of depoliticization, and the replacement of this by other things like economics or culture or law. In fact, this is the whole point of earlier things of how the legal liberals tried to marginalize politics by putting administration and law above politics. But this is a depoliticization, and therefore there is an echo at this level of this attempt to depoliticize, total depoliticization, by the creation of global governance, right? Um, in this non-existence of states. As a result of the 1990 peace treaties, an incongruous organization came into existence, the Geneva Establishment, which is called in German, Volkerbund, in French, Sociétés des Nations, an English League of Nations, but should properly be called a Society of Nations. This body is an organization which presumes the existence of states, regulates their mutual relations, and even guarantees their political existence. It is neither universal nor even international organization. If the German word for the international is used correctly and honestly, it must be distinguished from interstate and applied instead to international movements, which transcend the borders of states and ignores the territorial integrity, interpenetrability, and impermeability of existing states. As, for example, the Third International. Right? In other words, the Third International sought to destroy things like transcend the international movements, which transcend the border of states, ignore territorial integrity and impenetrability, and the impermeability of existing states. In other words, for example, the Third International, immediately exposed here are the elementary antithesis of international and interstate. For a depoliticized universal society, and interstate guarantees of the status quo of existing frontiers. Um, in other words, a depoliticized universal society and an interstate one guarantees of status quo of existing frontiers. How to comprehend how a scholarly treatment of the League of Nations could skirt this and even lend support to this confusion. The Geneva League of Nations does not eliminate the possibilities of war, just as it does not abolish states. It introduces new possibilities for wars, permits wars to take place, sanctions coalition wars, and by legitimizing and sanctioning certain wars, it sweeps away many obstacles to war. So this is even more drastic, right? He's saying, as its place, as it has existed so far, in under certain circumstances, a very useful meeting place, a systems of diplomatic conferences which meet under the name of the League of Nations Council and the Assembly of the League of Nations. These bodies are linked to a technical bureau, that of the Secretariat. As I have already shown elsewhere, okay, this is 24 on the Conference of the Volksbund in 1926, right? Another article by him. This establishment is not a league, but possibly an alliance. So a league is really not a league per se, but an alliance. The genuine concept of humanity is expressed in it insofar as its actual activities resides in the humanitarian and not in the political field. And only as an interstate administrative community does it at least have a tendency towards a meaningful universality. So it's not, in other words, as interstate administrative community doesn't have a meaningful universality. But in other words, it allows administrations to cooperate. In other words, administrative entities are able to cooperate between states in order to accomplish certain goods, right? But in this view, but in view of the League's true constitution and its so-called, because this so-called League still enables war to be fought, even this tendency is an ideal postulate only. A League of Nations which is not universal can only be politically significant when it represents a potential or actual alliance, i.e., a coalition. The just belly, the right of war, would not thereby be abolished, but more or less totally or partially transferred to the alliance, so that the alliance would declare what is the cause, the justification of war, or the right of war. A League of Nations, as a concrete existing universal human organization, would, on the contrary, to have to accomplish the difficult task, that of first, of effectively taking away the just belly from all the existing human groupings, and second, simultaneously not assume the best just belly itself. Right, it would have to take away this league in order to exist in an existing universal human organization. Would have to remove the just belly from all the existing actors who have it, and simultaneously not assume it for itself. Otherwise, universality, humanity, and depoliticized society, in short, all essential characteristics, would be eliminated. In other words, if it secondly did this, then all these characteristics would be eliminated in that sense. Were a world state to embrace the entire globe and humanity, then it would be no political entity and could only be loosely called a state. If in fact all humanity and the entire world were to become unified entirely based on economics and technically regulating traffic, then it is still not more. Then it still would not be more of a social entity than a social entity of tenants in a tenement house, consumers purchasing gas from the same utility company, or passengers traveling on the same bus. An interest group concerned inclusively with economics or traffic cannot become more than that. In absence of an adversary, in other words, there's no adversary, this is only interest group. Should that instant group also want to become cultural, ideological, and otherwise more ambitious, and yet remain strictly unpolitical, it would be a neutral consumer or producer cooperative moving between the poles of ethics and economics. It would know neither state nor kingdom nor empire, neither republic nor monarchy, neither aristocracy nor democracy, neither protection nor obedience, and would altogether lose its political character. In other words, it would be no political. It would be consumer said it would be ethical relations and economic relations, and it would go between these two situations. The acute question to pose is upon whom will fall the frightening power implied in the world embracing economic and technical organization. Who will have this power? This question can by no means be dismissed in the belief that everything would then be functioned automatically. The thing would administer themselves, and that government by the people over people would be superfluous because human beings would then be absolutely free. In other words, this is a great line. This question can no means dismiss, even if this situation would fall a frightening power implied in this model, right? This embracing this all-embracing economic and technical organization, and and the question cannot be merely dismissed that in the belief that everything would function automatically. Nope, things would administer themselves, and government by people over people would be superfluous because human beings would be free. Nonsense, he says. For what would they be free? This can be answered by optimistic and pessimistic conjectures, all of which finally leads to an anthropological possession of faith. In other words, this is oh yeah, everything's going to be like wonderful humanity, blah, 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 blah. Tyranny of the worst possible sort. Okay. Unhuman world of power. So Schmitt ends this section on this problem that this idea of humanity or this world system of Just eat now. You think that's not either this Nazi vision of the perfect race that would no longer the Nazis ultimately the idea once you have the perfect race we wouldn't need these people. In other words, the same thing with the communists. There's no universal amen. We want to work as a paradise. So everyone decides what we want. There's no need for the state. The state will wither away because everything's economic, right? But this is a dehumanized world, and that humans are not no longer there in both of these situations. And that even the liberal vision of this economic man, of this liberal trade things, of human things, is that all the ideological visions produce an inhumanity, a fundamental inhumanity, be it liberalism, communism, Nazism, all produce an inhumanity that violates an ideological structure that creates a artificial structure of rationality, which then produces a false world that imposes itself on the world. Right? This is the ideological vision. Now Schmitt doesn't get into that here. I don't think he gets into it, but he hints at it. I think this is that insight about why humanity cannot be the end state of this. This is not a possibility. As long as human beings that have formed communities and formed societies, there's going to be one society is going to be threatened by another group, and that threatening of that group upon one society is going to create an enemy, and the enemy creates the political group. Well, that's it. We did chapter 7. I hope people have any. If you have any questions, please put them below. And if I get to them, see them. I'll get to them and respond. If you liked it, come on, like it. Share with a friend, forward it around, send it on social media, Twitter it. If you have not subscribed, subscribe, please, and get others to subscribe, like the World Channel. If you didn't like it, I'll tell why in the comments. You can thumb it down, but say why. But again, if others do like it, please, if you have not subscribed, subscribe and get others to do it. We need to grow the channel a little bit. The other thing is that you want to follow me on social media. The links are below, my social media links. If you want to help me with this, okay, you can help me you can be a member of Subscribe Star, Patreon. I understand. Well, what goodies you're going to give us? Well, once there's a group of people there, and once there's a community there, I will deliver things. I've been trying. I'm a little disorganized now because, again, these I like on Monday and Tuesdays. Mondays and Wednesdays I post on the big reading, the big Montesquieu, which is going to take forever. I'm doing it slowly because the readings are like long, a book, a thing, and I have to do long videos. And I'll continue these on Wednesdays. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, I will do the Schmitt stuff until I'll get the next Schmitt. We'll finish this up in a couple of times. Where next time we'll do number 7. Next time you see us, we'll do number 7. And then we have one more chapter, one more section 8, and then I'll probably find maybe another Schmitt. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll do Kojève. I don't know. We'll see what next or how I feel what I do. I'll do something small, and that's it. So I hope everything's okay. Now Fridays I'm going to try to do the live streams. I had a disaster. Okay, I just got a date when it happens. We didn't have a live stream on Friday because the internet wasn't working. It was like I could get an email, but when I tried doing the live stream, this wouldn't set up. It wouldn't connect. It was just gonna clock. It was just like I gave up after 45 minutes, and this went out of frustration, just trying to do it. It was like I don't know what's going on. So hopefully this won't happen this time. But that's on Fridays. We do our live stream again at 6:00. Everything is at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time and 6:00 Central European Time, 6 p.m. Central European Time. So that's it. I hope you guys like what I do here. See you again. Have a good day. Take care. Bye bye. See you again next time on this.